Welcome back to the Beyond the Comet podcast, where we talk about the magic and the mystery of the future and technology. I'm still Ahmed, and Cody's still Cody. And today we're going to be talking about law in general and the legal system and how AI and other technologies will make them different in the future. So, you ready for this, Cody?
I think I am. There's a lot out there to unpack. It's going to be interesting because things are moving really fast, and I have a different maybe thought process on this that occurred to me lately. I'm not as scared as I think the lawyers may be.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting perspective because for those who don't know, I have been a lawyer and continue to practice a little bit. And I've always been a solo practitioner, so not as part of a big firm. And I've always had other pursuits at the same time. So I come from a different perspective where I don't feel as specifically threatened by all of these changes. I try to stay flexible and can look for the opportunities and things. But at the same time, there are people who spend years and a lot of money choosing these fields, and this is going to affect their lives. And I think it's also going to affect the lives of people who depend on legal services and the law, which is pretty much everybody.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to actually attack this field as badly as some of the others. Like, I think that's what everyone's afraid of. But I think that there's just more intangibility to practicing law. I mean, I think you might have a different perspective on this, but it seems like the interpretation of what is going on is very important, and the current status of AI probably can't handle that because it's kind of, how do you decide how to rule on a certain situation via two arguments? There's like a human factor there almost, because sometimes if you just lived the letter of the law, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of laws out there that don't make sense that have been on the books, and a computer would be like, oh, well, yeah, you're guilty. But it's like, oh, I think there's that like old law where you can still beat your wife if the stick isn't longer than a certain,
right.
Yeah, and it's in certain states. And of course, if that went to court, people would be like, this is ridiculous. This is old and doesn't belong in the legal system anymore. But a robot wouldn't know that.
Right. And I think the defining quality of law is it's not black or white, it's the gray area. And that's where there's so much debate. And that's why, two similar situations can go different ways in court. And it depends on how it's argued, who's representing you, and things like that. But I think top level, we should I think it's important to realize that there's different types of law. And I agree with what most people, when they think about law, they think about courtrooms and arguments back and forth and representing one client versus another client, which is a significant part of the law. But there's also, and I do agree that aspect is going to be one of the last to be replaced, partially because of tradition, partially because technology isn't there yet. And the rules that are in court already against recording audio and having certain technology is going to prevent that from taking over. I think where you'll see the changes first are in more document-based legal fields. So things like, you sign an employment contract with your employer, and who's going to look over that? Some people don't even look at it with a lawyer because either it's not worth it or it's too expensive. But those sort of things are perfect for an AI service where they can scan through, look at the areas you need to look at, or the things that don't line up with the state law where you are, or certain issues you want to look into. That's a lot quicker, and it's a lot more accessible than what it is currently in terms of going to a lawyer with your contract.
Yeah, it seems like this is more, what you're saying is it's more the protective aspect of having a lawyer review your documentation that you may be signing is beneficial, and that may not be needed as much. But there's still, like, if you're creating contracts, and this is more of a question, if you're creating contracts, isn't there some sort of understanding of the situation and what can be used, like a cohesive knowledge that allows you to build these contracts in a way that better protects your client?
Yeah, I would love to say that happens all the time, but in practice, and I would be it would be interesting to find out if other people's experiences are different. But in practice, a lot of what you'll see is so and so hands you this form, like, we've been using this form for 20 years. Just update this with the name and change the stuff you need to, and then move forward. And many contracts that I've reviewed and looked over, there's glaring errors or issues where people just assume this is fine. Like, so and so gave it to me at my firm, or so and so handed this to me, and he knows what he's doing, or she knows what he's doing, and so I don't need to change anything. And then certain things get left in there, and people aren't looking to see, like you said, does this apply to Cody's specific case and Cody's specific state, or the issues he's going through? And because of that, it's not as tailored as you would think and you would expect. It's a lot of using forms and just, I don't want to say just replacing the name, but it leans more to that side than this customized kind of tailored approach that people might want.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there's definitely a copy and paste element. I mean, just in people creating their own documentation when they go outside of legal advice or help. They just, you just go on the internet, you find a template, and then you utilize that. But I think where the biggest issue and where lawyers have kind of ensconced their value is the confusing terminology. So reading document, and I always thought this is the worst part about the legal system in all senses, is I think that things should be, I get it why it's there, but I think things should be said in plain English. But of course, then you have to make sure for every eventuality that any possible argument is dealt with. So there's this, it's kind of a comprehensive way of speaking. I don't know how AI will help with that. I mean, it can definitely probably explain it. So like it could probably take a document and then rewrite it in plain English so that anyone can understand.
That's one of the things I'm hoping for that AI can do, but you have to understand part of why it's there is to protect the field. Because if you remove the heretofores and hereunder and thereupon and all that stuff, and sentences that go on for 3 or 4 sentences relating back to the same start of the sentence that are very difficult even for an attorney to figure out. It's time consuming and you have to go through the process and break it all down. There's a reason, because by keeping it difficult to do, you're protecting your own job. It's why the tax code isn't like you pay 20% and that's it. And if you have a problem, then you raise it. It's like convoluted so that accountants have a job, and that's job security. And I don't think it's some sort of big conspiracy. I think there's actually, as you said, there's benefit to having these clauses and making sure everything is discussed and exhausting detail and every eventuality that could happen. But at the same time, it prevents people from, it makes it so that if you have a contract that's not reviewed by a lawyer, you might be missing something, an important thing. But it's intimidating to try and do yourself because of all of this language.
So I think, yeah, but once AI kind of enters the space, which it kind of already is, and just to give some background why, AI is becoming a very big element in this space is because the last GPT-4 did really well on passing the bar and was able to pass all these legal tests to show that it had proficiency in being I mean, you took the bar, so does passing the bar make you a good lawyer?
That's a great question. It's defined as like a minimum competency. And you take it as after you typically graduate law school. Some states are different, but typically after you graduate law school, it is more showing that you have the skills to do it. It's not necessarily, it doesn't mean at all that you can, once you pass the bar, you're ready to go. Like you can represent a client with no training. You still have to learn the specific laws in your field. It's more of, I wouldn't compare it to the SAT exam, but in the sense that if you take the SAT before you go to college, you're not all of a sudden ready for college because you did well on the SATs. It just shows that you have a minimum proficiency to perform law. There are clearly attorneys who pass the bar who aren't very good at it, aren't very competent at it, and even if they were at the time, they may not be at this point. And even if they did that, they may not be, they still make mistakes. And I think ChatGPT 4 passing the bar proves that it can retain facts and apply them to different situations and questions. But that by itself doesn't prove it can do the job, but neither does the fact that people, human beings, pass the bar.
Yeah. And I also think that, I mean, of course, there's going to be some questions that are more creative in their answers. But it is, I mean, one of the issues with testing alone is you test on your general knowledge, as you said. So it doesn't really figure in application, like how you apply that knowledge. And also, I feel like, and I don't know if it was able to have great amount of data in there. I mean, if test questions and sample test questions were in there, because I mean, even for humans who are studying for the bar, you get or old tests or whatever that you get to see relevant ideas that might come up.
Mhm.
So I think that if they were going to make a bar test for ChatGPT to test its capabilities, I think it would do worse. But to take a test made for humans and give it to a robot, is that really an accurate assessment? It's like,
Yeah, that's what I can say for with high confidence that the the grade, there are basically the bar is either you pass or you don't, but they can look at your scores and see where you scored on different aspects of it. How you scored doesn't necessarily mean you're a better or worse lawyer than someone who scored differently than you.
yeah,
So in the same way, it's just kind of like you're clearing a hurdle. Doesn't
yeah,
matter how high you clear the hurdle, you just have to get over it. And so I don't think it's a fair assessment. I think it's proof that there is value to AI in this field, that it can do some of the tasks, especially now. I think it can already speed up things and make things more efficient in terms of research and finding out existing cases and things that are supporting of a certain case, or document review, as we mentioned. I think it's definitely going to help there. And to come back to what you said about kind of deciphering the legalese, I can't imagine how it wouldn't be helpful in that. Just taking a giant block of text and breaking it down to say, you will owe the company $50 if you don't turn in the modem, for example. That's all that most users would want out of that. Even the end user agreements that you see before you sign something, if you all of a sudden had a tool that would break that down into human language, that's a huge benefit.
yeah. And then it can also just, if you want to look into the actual documentation, it just links you right to that part of the document. And you can see what it's saying and fully understand it. Yeah, I think that allowing, and this is one of the gripes I've had with the legal system, I think that allowing the regular individual to protect themselves in some sense is important for our society to move forward, because I don't think that we should have a system where you are excluded because you didn't go to a certain type of college or chose a certain path,
Right.
especially since it involves all of us. Like, it is affecting all of us on a regular basis, whether you start your own company or, there's so many times where contracts and legal documents come to your, in front of you, and it's important that you can decipher it. I mean, I think that's gonna be the greatest part of this.
Right. And I think it's even more so as there's, social media and any document or anything that you interact with on the internet, there's likely some sort of agreement, which you could call a contract, that you're making anytime you even use a website, what you're going to use it for, what you're going to do with it, what liability you might have, what liability they might have. There's tons of it. And, it's gotten to the point where people see that and they're just like, I'm not going to read that, whatever, I'll just click it and go on. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think it is a question of access to legal knowledge and legal analysis, and that power that can come from that when people realize, like, they aren't shut out from this world. They're not outside of the gates to the powers that they can get through the legal system and the information that they can get about their own rights, that's not shut off from them.
Yeah. And I think people will still continue to click the EULA, because the big thing with the EULA, or what you're clicking before you get into a site or an application, is it's really the enticement of the app. We talked about this in a previous episode, where it's the enticement of the application and the exclusion of being part of that I think people don't want to give up. But you're right. At least at the very minimum, they would know what to look out for. I mean, in contracts, there's a bunch of stuff that maybe you might not feel comfortable with. So it might change the way that you produce your content, or because a lot of these media sites will say that they own certain parts of your media or the whole thing as you upload it to their website. And mostly they're probably doing this so that they can so they can use it for advertising. So if they want to make an advertisement for their site, I think that iHeartRadio does this. They can use any clips that they want from your current podcasts. Mm-hmm. But it's just good to know. I mean, like, I don't know if I wouldn't submit my podcast because of that, but it's nice that we're all on the same understanding of what's going on.
Right. And I think that's all that the typical person is looking for. You're not looking to, get one over on these companies. It's just, okay, if they are going to do that, I just want to be aware of it. I think in any legal contract or agreement that you're entering, that's all you want to know. It's like, I give you these things, you give me these things, and these are what we both have to do in the relationship. That's clear communication, and that's just open dealing. And I think that's missing today. I think a lot of times people, whether because of convenience or more likely, I think, because of they feel intimidated by the language in these contracts and the people who are making these contracts for them, that they just decide, it's not part of my world. And I really do hope that can change as AI becomes more present.
So let's talk about some of the other parts, because this is such a big topic, because sure. As we said, we're just like in contract law right now. Mm-hmm. But you were saying before the podcast about how laws come into existence, and like how right. and I it's interesting that it might even affect our legal system in a whole, like whether it be precedents or actual laws coming from Congress,
right?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So the general, and I know it's generally shaped by the U.S. system, but you have people who make the laws. In the U.S., it's the Congress. They'll make the laws, and then it's passed. The technical aspects they're there obviously, but I don't think they're as important to get into. It's just there's a group of people that makes the laws. To date, the idea is that those people represent what the average people in the United States and businesses want. That I'm sure everyone can accept that doesn't always happen as smoothly as everyone would want. That lawmaking aspect, I really think there's room for improvement with AI. I think if you even just have an analysis of what has worked in the past, say we're building a bridge and we need to fund for that, or we need to regulate traffic. There have been systems done across the world. If an AI was able to look and see what was successful, what worked in different situations, which laws worked, which laws didn't, and give you a better analysis and a clear definition independent of this party wants this or that party wants this, I think that clears a lot of the vagueness and the influence from the lawmaking process.
Definitely. And it's really good to have, as you said, a full understanding of the environment as a whole. And I think that, even if it's conflicting with other laws, or, I think as humans, we're limited in our ability to scour through, mounds of data. It just because, it's a time thing too. Like as you said, if you're trying to get through a project done, there's only so much time that you can, construct this law and get it, up in front of the right, I guess would be, I don't know. I'm not as good at this as you are, but get it right in front of the right people. It just takes time, and maybe you don't have that luxury to take that much time. But yeah, I think that it's going to be really nice in being able to kind of fill these laws out so that they're more, and not even just they fit into the world today, but they also kind of consider what's happening in the future, what's happening in all fields. Because I think what AI is going to be really good is finding trends and being able to basically look at analytics and kind of see how everything is changing. Because if you're making a law in one field, another field might be able to utilize that law unbeknownst to you. And that's like, and if AI can kind of say like, hey, look at this. This is also a trend that's happening in this field that this law could also help. Then you can also construct the documentation for that to include that eventuality.
Yeah, and just building off of that, and it's off of a current event topic, with any proposed legislation, which is like a law that's going to come out, there is there are like a giant stack of papers, maybe like sometimes 3 or 4 feet of paper. And then when the law is released, you have reporters and other interested people, staffers, kind of pouring through there, looking through these thousands of papers of document to see the relevant stuff. There is no human being on the planet who can get through that at the same efficiency that you would just reading a one-page document. If there is an AI technology which combs through all of that, it's a digital file, it combs through it pretty much instantly, hits the things that you need, the things that you're interested in. Say like, I own a farm and I want to know how this law is going to affect my ability to get water or land rights. It can comb through that, say specifically what those issues are, and then all of a sudden, instead of saying, I don't know what's in there, I know specifically what's in there and how specifically it would affect me if this was passed. It can run scenarios and say, if this law is passed in your state, this is how it's going to be affected. In the next state, how is it going to be affected? And I think that access is such a game changer when it comes to politics in general and the act of lawmaking, because people don't feel connected to it. You hear about, say, for example, the TikTok hearings. You hear them saying, we want to make this safer for kids. We want to, restrict their access to dangerous content. But included in this are things that are not at all related to kids. That will affect adults, like using a VPN, which you can explain better. But the idea that would be restricted by a law that was intended to keep kids safe.
Yeah, and this happens all the time where amendments to like a bill or like it's just like things are kind of slid into the bottom of something that's already being passed, and right. Basically they just, because of the amount of data that you have to comb through, it's like people put a face on it, but you can't see the feet that that they just tacked, or the shoes they just tacked on, which is and so it's like they kind of slide these things that get passed under the illusion of being something else. And yeah, I think that it'll help that a lot. What I'm maybe concerned about is the due process being slowed down, because now everybody has eyes on it. And I think that the issue may be if it's too transparent, too easy to understand, which seems weird, but it might. Now because if everyone knew what was going on, then there'd be a camp that didn't like it, a camp that liked it. Now it's like all this uproar about all things, which is good, but it may make the process a lot slower.
See,
harder.
I don't know if I disagree. I just think that's the way it is now. People are disagreeing kind of out of hand. Even before, like, when a bill is released based on just rumor and speculation, people will say, I'm against it. They obviously haven't had time. Within like 30 minutes of getting thousands of papers, they're going to say, I'm against this. There's no way they can read that in that time. All I think that AI can do is clarify the information to make it very clear. Like we were saying with, entering into a contract, exactly what's in this. You know how it affects your interests, and then you're more educated and empowered to either defend it or to support it. Defend it or be against it. It's just more information, and rather than just emotion, or rather than just, I'm against this because this guy came out with it or because this woman came out with it. It's more specific to what's actually in the bill.
Yeah, and these systems kind of already are in place. Like if I really want to know about something, that's going on, that may be too hard for me to understand. I just go to YouTube, find somebody that already read it, understands how to simplify it, and tell me what it's all about and what may be the problems or advantages for this bill or this piece of document that is challenging. And that just takes it out of their hands and now into the access of being on your phone, where you can just basically click the document and it just tells you a synopsis or whatever.
I think the other benefit too, though, is you're not filtering it through an individual who may have. Every human being has some sort of bias, and I know
that's true.
AI still has certain biases because of who trains it, but it reduces that aspect, and so there may be more agreement that, okay, this bill says A through Z. That's kind of, if it's done well enough, there may be agreement on this does A through Z. You're still going to have people saying, I don't like A, B, and C parts of this bill, but at least everyone can agree what the bill actually does. Because there's still confusion now, even when you get outside agencies that are typically regarded as independent, there's still debate as to, no, I don't agree with them. I don't think it's going to do that. But if you have more of a system of saying, this is the most likely scenario, if we implement this law, this is going to happen, it moves it away from just bickering about what might happen into should this happen. And I think that's where progress comes.
I mean, but isn't this already kind of occurring at a slower rate? I mean, when something becomes public, then everyone has to come over this. So it just slows everybody down. But it's still, I think the way that these sub paragraphs are being passed, into the bill, is because it's the bill that they're attached to. Is basically it's the same thing as the EULA. It's like you pair it with something that people really like and want, and now it's paired up with something that people are like, I don't know if that's really good, but they don't want to give up the chance to get the one thing that they really want by not allowing for the other thing to be attached to it.
Right.
And so, I mean, maybe this could help because the rewriting of the bill or the negotiation of what's in there would be eased a little bit so that it could be more fluid and there could be changes and arguments faster. So that, because a lot of this thing is like there's a clock and you have to get it done by a certain time, and it's almost like a sport. Like you're waiting for the last buzzer to hit the three shot, the three,
right.
and you're changing your entire style of how you play the game to get it at the last second, so no one can do anything about it.
Yeah, I think you're right that the mechanisms are there. For example, there's certain reporters who will look and as much as they can, being a human, comb through the information and see what are the risks, what are the opportunities in a bill. But I think there is a level shift when it's AI and the thoroughness is so much higher that it's like front to back. It's comparing it against other documents, other versions of contracts. I mean, just to give a little insight in the contract process, there's a lot to learn just from seeing different versions of a contract that are sent back and forth in a negotiation. You can see that, they change this or they change that. And some attorneys don't even really consider that. They just take the new one and assume it's the same as before. But if you're, not very ethical, you could change something in a part of a contract that you didn't agree to and just hope the other person doesn't notice it. That wouldn't happen with AI. You could have that as one of the checks and simultaneously check all sorts of other things. Make sure the definitions are the same. Make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of understanding what we're talking about. And I just think that level of thoroughness is going to increase the confidence that this bill is exactly what is listed or summarized. There's no doubt. There's no confusion about it. And I think that adds a lot to the conversation.
Yeah. And, to get back, to get to the negotiation, I think that as I was saying, one of the tactics is playing with time, but now if you can't be like, oh, I'm still reviewing the documents, I didn't have time to look at them, that excuse kind of goes out the window. So if you are trying to play with how much time there is left to try to slide stuff in or make your position stronger, because there won't be enough time to make these changes, hopefully things will get figured out earlier so that, that process, the negotiation process, can go smoother, because there's less to do, and there's less compiling to do. So
Yeah.
you can really hide behind the compilation process to try to manipulate the negotiation. But I still think negotiations aren't the way negotiations happen. I don't think is going to change. I think people are still going to use all tactics to try to get an advantage and get what they want across, which, whether it be attaching to something that's better or waiting for the last second so there's not enough time. All these things. I don't think that AI is going to change that process, but it may make it a little cleaner.
Yeah, I think it'll make it cleaner. Plus, it shifts so I think you're always in a balance between doing something quickly and doing something well. Most humans, it's hard to do both at the same time. Like, if I gave you an hour to write a document, or I gave you 5 minutes, most likely your hour is going to be a better quality. But with AI, you theoretically could have both at the same time, where if someone hands you a 50-page document and says, Cody, review this by tomorrow, you may be able to, but you're probably going to miss some things. Most likely with AI, if it does that, whether it's a proposal in a negotiation or not, that allows me in a negotiation to focus more on the strategy, the tactics that you were talking about, and not worry about missing specific details. So as a tool, I think it will make it more efficient and, as you said, cleaner. And I think it could open up ways of finding common ground, or ways that both parties could do better, because you're not focused specifically on the grunt work of combing through documents.
An interesting aspect of this, which I don't think has been talked about too much, is each individual lawyer will be able to take on more caseloads, because so effectively allowing them to help more people, which is a supply and demand element. So would they? I don't know if this would allow them to lower their cost, because they're able to have a higher quantity, which makes lawyers more accessible to more people, to more different economics.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I know. No, it makes sense. If, for example, a doctor can see patients quicker, theoretically, they can lower the cost per patient and still make the same amount of money. If you could see 10 patients in an hour rather than one patient in an hour, you can get 1/10 of the price and still make the same amount of money. So it's definitely the case. And I think we've already seen that to a degree with technology, and the ability to send a contract overseas to someone who has a lower hourly wage and can get through more contracts. That has affected the cost of legal services. And I think this is definitely going to do the same thing, whether it's AI doing the whole job or it's AI assisting an attorney to get through more contracts and draft more contracts. If they can do it more quickly, then necessarily it should, even if they may want to keep their prices up, I think the competition, because other attorneys are willing to do it for less and can do it quickly, will drive the price down.
So this is actually kind of hurting legal assistants more than anybody. Like, legal assistants and that's kind of the route for a lot of people to get into legal practice.
It can be, but yeah, no, I think you're right in that there's a lot of support services, not just legal assistants, but paralegals and administrative folks who do a lot of these individual steps, which, as we've talked about in so many fields, they are, the more formulaic they are, the more you could just follow certain steps, do X, Y, Z, assemble them and make Y. The more it is like that, the easier it is for AI to replace. But I don't see that stopping at a certain level. I don't think once you get to most attorneys, I don't think it's a point where you say, oh, we can't replace them with AI. I think for the vast majority of legal services, I think you actually can replace them. And not right now, but I can see them being replaced.
Well, the second you have to, if you're going into other parts of laws that aren't just contract law, but even contract law, you have to I guess contract law, you don't ever have to see the other person on the other side of the table. Right. Yeah, you don't have to. But for others type of law, you have to go into the court. There are physical responsibilities where you have to be at some place representing something. And that's why, those jobs will probably be secure because that still needs to be the case.
So, but one of the biggest things in that raises the cost of like in court, or it's called litigation, is reviewing documents that come in during trial. And this is actually a tactic, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, where if a little guy is suing a bigger guy, say companies, the bigger company with more resources will just dump them with all sorts of documents. Like we're talking millions of documents, just knowing that they don't have the time or ability to comb through that. That completely changes if you have AI to say, okay, thanks for the 10 million documents. We'll get through that and then find out the ones that are important and then address the issue. That levels the playing field significantly. So you no longer can just you just use volume to push someone else down. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. Good.
Oh, no, I was just saying, which would be less continuances, less delay, because everything's happening so much fast. Because a lot of these tactics are to delay the other side in order to give your team a little bit more time to, whatever, get the interview or the, whatever, if it's a defense case.
Yeah. And sometimes the strategy is just to delay until the other person gives up, because while you're delaying, you have to pay your attorneys. But theoretically, if you're the bigger, or if you're Facebook suing a tiny tech firm, the tech firm's going to run out of money at a certain point. Lawyers are not cheap. And so if they're in court longer and longer, if they have more documents to review, eventually they will either run out of money or give up or some combination. So that tactic will necessarily reduce if you can get through the documents that they're sending and make the whole process quicker.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel that the bullying tactics of large corporations is gross. I mean, I definitely do. It's either trying to get them to settle on a case, because before it even gets to trial, so that they can keep doing whatever they're doing. They just throw money around. Or, as you said, they use bullying tactics to try to drain you of your resources and the ability to pay lawyers and carry the case on.
Yeah.
But also lawyers will be cheaper in this, with AI. So hopefully it'll bring down the cost of that so that there will be more opportunity for small individuals to, make space for them in the legal system.
And what I like about this too is it will provide hope and belief in the system, because I think a lot of people just don't feel that the legal system is made for them. I don't think they feel that it's there to represent their interests. They either assume that if you have money or you have power, you'll get what you want. And me as the little guy, I can't get that. So if you can't afford the best attorney or attorney at all, you're basically shut out from the legal system. If, because of what we're talking about, lowering costs and increasing access, you can do that, I think you're going to find a lot more people believing in the legal system and utilizing the legal system to actually go after things that they deserve or they should fight for. Yeah, because I know for a fact there's a lot of people who don't even try to bring cases that may be likely to win because they don't feel confident enough that they either have the resources or the time or the ability to pursue that to the end.
Yeah. So I have a question. How do you think that? And I don't really know, so I'm just going to ask. How do you think this is going to change, lobbyists and the lobbying system, and the way that things are actually being put into law or put into place? Because there's a lot of money there, in that system, and I think it's still going to exist, and I can't really see how AI will be able. I mean, a lot of the things we're saying could alleviate that, but that's the throwing money at it part of it, where companies are throwing a ton of money to get what they want and have the world be the way they want so that they can thrive.
Right. I think that's a very difficult thing to fix right away, because anytime you have an individual or corporation with financial interest, they're going to use that they're going to use as much financial power as they have to protect those interests. And whether new technology comes to level the playing field or to just bring more light to the issue, they're creative. They'll find ways, no matter what laws are passed to prevent lobbyists from having influence or making it more transparent, there's always workarounds, and it's in their interest to find workarounds. So I don't think it's a fix, but I think increased technology and AI can help bring light to it. And I am a firm believer that if you have more light and transparency in an issue, things change, that people start realizing. For example, if you could run I'm not sure what to call it, but if you could have AI check your congressperson and see who are they getting money from, and the instant they receive a payment, that it's disclosed, and then you could track that first, and then you could see what influence did it have on their voting. This is something that people can do now, but it's a labor-intensive, time-intensive process. And if you could do it instantly and then compare them with other congresspeople or senators, it is a lot of information, a lot of transparency that even though the information is there now, it's not packaged in a consumable way. And I think that's where AI can make that happen.
Yeah, but on the other side, people would say that AI is going to make the corruptibility and also the evaluation of potential corruptible voters, like the people that you can actually get to sway your votes, all the swing votes that you're trying to target will become more available to those people that are, in the place of power to be elected or, have influence. And then, if they're getting paid to try to move in a certain way by these large corporations, it almost gives them somewhat of an advantage because it almost makes that machine a little bit more effective. Like the AI on the other side, it's like, actually, I wrote down, this actually brings us to the Cambridge Analytica, which, there you go. See? And Cambridge Analytica was in 2016, and they basically got a bunch of dumped information from Facebook, and Facebook allowed them to do that. And then they used this to kind of target ads and find specific voters that they could influence to sway in a certain way. And I believe it was specifically towards Trump's campaign.
I think it was some other politicians as well.
With some other politicians as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but I mean, that's what we're talking about, and now it can, if you can get a big enough data set, which, there's so many out there, that are combing our personal data and what we feel. And now you can have a machine analyze that. You can push the system in a certain way to, whether it be, to put laws, have somebody that is going to advocate for you in laws that'll be, enacted in the future, or positions that will be held.
Yeah, for sure.
Scary,
I mean,
man.
it's just it's very scary. It's not like some of the stuff we talk about where we're extrapolating what might happen. This sort of stuff already happened, and there were big fines. I think Facebook was hit with a $5 billion fine, which may or may not be big to them, but still it's big to me. It is a scary future. The thing that I'm hopeful for is that laws keep up with that. So in the same way that if someone uses a firearm or a gun when they're committing a crime, that increases the penalty for it. If people are doing this sort of fraud with AI, you could set up a law so that it increases the penalty for it. So it deters people from using this for illegal things. But I get what you're saying, that some of these things aren't necessarily illegal. They're just unethical. So that's a gray area. But I do think AI is such a potentially positive and negative weapon that it should be regulated more.
I actually loved what you said. And it made me about, changing the value of the penalties that may occur from a certain crime. It makes me think a lot of game design, actually, where when you're, designing a game, there's all these, like, especially, competitive games where there's a lot of people competing against each other. There's all these values and weights, like how much effect certain things have on other things. And one of the things that makes the cohesive experience better is by changing these weights so that they really interplay well with each other. And I don't see the difference at all, because, if you get into the legal system and the value of how much penalty is attributed to this kind of crime, to kind of have a more cohesive system that works better and kind of minimize. So you could say, well, how do we retune all of these penalties to
Hmm.
better reduce gun violence, and like
Right.
it could comb all that data and kind of, I mean, it is the AI large language models are just a set of weights themselves,
Right.
which allow them to do what they need to do. um, but it is really interesting thinking of the legal system as a fine tuning of the cohesiveness of every kind of penalty out there to try to make a better society, or better experience for the people that are living in this world.
Yeah. It's a interesting comparison because I have some knowledge. You obviously have a lot more knowledge in terms of game design, but I've seen articles and heard from people who say they don't like or they like certain games because it's too easy, for example, to buy certain credit in the game and become like the best or overpowered user
Yeah.
in that game, which takes the fun away because it's no longer fair. You can just buy in rather than doing the work in the game. Or comparing it to life, just having the money gets you the access to making laws or evading the law. Where if you're just doing 9 to 5 and you're doing your job and working, you're at an unfair disadvantage just because you don't have the ability to buy into the system. So I think that's, in a way, the law is like game designing for the game of life. So you're trying to make society more equitable. And I think that's a huge way that AI can help, looking at the outcomes, saying, these politicians took illegal bribes, and then looking at the potential solutions, and then finding the most.
We're
Yep.
Yeah, something happened.
Okay. All right. We're back after a quick technical hiccup. But I was talking about the influence that money can have in games and how that's similar to how the money that people spend to influence politicians or to hire attorneys to get them out of crimes and things like that are very similar. And in both, we're trying to find a way to make things fair. Things will never be completely fair, but make them more fair so that each person has an equal shot in the game of winning the game, and in life of just going through life and, achieving what you can for your work without being unnecessarily disadvantaged. And I think it's a really good comparison you made to gaming because it fits. And I think AI will help us kind of change the weights in terms of criminal and civil punishments.
So, I actually see it as also just being to identify the influence of certain practices. So when you give the example of it's called pay to win, but
Mhm.
in if there's pay to win in our government process or legal system, what is the impact of that? What is the impact of these certain practices like the lobbying and everything we're talking
Mhm.
about? What is the impact of that? And it just comes down to data, and how is that impacting society as a whole, and how can we change and elect new laws to be able to better our society and better
Right.
tune the system? So
Right.
if the system is an engine, and we just I mean, they're putting the wrong type of gasoline in, and but we don't know because nobody's paying attention. But now AI is going to be paying attention, so it will be able to say, well, hey, we better
Yeah.
elect a lot more laws, that get money out of the system, or whatever. Who knows what it's going to take? But it is
Yeah.
a full analysis of the functionality of our society, which is amazing.
Using, yeah, I agree. It's amazing. And using your analogy of the car, it's like having diagnostics being run on the car, like what's your fuel levels, what's the temperature of the water in the car, everything, every single aspect of the car, but not just once when you go into the shop. It's continually doing that. It's doing it as the car is running, when it stopped at a stoplight, anytime. And if we do that same thing for any system, but specifically to this case, the political system and the act of making laws, of enforcing laws, you have ideally an unbiased, or at least a non-human biased source telling you this is the most likely approach that'll lead to the outcomes that you want. And that's something we don't have now, and we can't, as humans, we are limited. We can't do that on a regular basis and continually.
Yeah, and I also think that as humans, we're not able to make a good argument for change, especially when other people are being so advantaged by the system being corrupted or manipulated. But if something is unpartial as AI may be, as again, of course, it could be trained in a certain way, but if it is fully unpartial and it is able to give a full analysis, people I think will start to listen. Like, hey, it's saying that this practice that keeps going on is highly affecting our society as a whole, and it's affecting us being happy. I mean, just the amount of money that gets wasted, alone is statistically, could be statistically tuned to be better.
Yeah, and it's so much of it is just not knowing their other approaches. I mean, take something as simple as like we're trying to get from this side of the river to that side. So there'll be tons of laws and proposals of, do we make a bridge? Do we make a tunnel? Do we start a ferry? All of that stuff. You can analyze it instantly. And like we said, and somewhat impartial, definitely less partial than a human being. And you can look not just at what did we do last week? What did we do last year or 10 years ago? You can look at globally when people had this similar issue through the course of history, what worked, what didn't, and how does that apply to our citizens and our tax base and everything like that. That's a level of analysis that it's impossible to imagine a human being could have, and could be accessible to the average citizen, which is it's an amazing development, and I'm personally pretty excited for it.
Yeah, me too.
So that wraps up another episode of our podcast. So thank you for listening. Hopefully we'll be back next week. Well, not hopefully. We'll be back next week talking about another topic in the future. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on social media. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Anything else, Cody?
Not TikTok.
Not TikTok. Because
we don't feel that
reasons.
There's much value in getting on a sinking ship. So
right. But
there's Discord. We have a Discord channel. Everything is up on our website, which is dynasatech.com. Please come
put
there.
A link to that.
Yeah, please come there, and then you'll see all the different things that we are doing. All right.
Great. Well, thanks, and see you then.
All right.